Marcus Licinius Crassus was a Roman politician well known for his greed, overall petty nature, and eventual brutal death in one of the most metal ways imaginable. Born sometime around 115 to 112 BC, Crassus had a pretty tumultuous early life, going from rich to poor to rich again for reasons I haven't really read too much about, but he did eventually find himself in a seat of great power within the Roman Empire as the resident sugar daddy of the First Triumvirate. The First Triumvirate being a very lucrative but relatively dubious political alliance between Caesar, who I'm sure we're all familiar with, Pompey, who functioned as the group's muscle, and Crassus, who just had a lot of money. Now, Crassus just being a man who had a lot of money doesn't really make him feel like the most important team member, but as mediocre as Crassus himself was, his wealth was crucial to keeping the triumvirate afloat. His wealth really was his whole personality, because despite possessing roughly 300 talents of silver, something around 10 tons, Crassus just couldn't seem to match up politically or militarily with Pompey and Caesar, which led to a lot of rivalry and petty jabs. Always keen to deepen his pockets, Crassus was a big fan of utilizing government, or rather, Caesar-sanctioned prescriptions to seize the goods of his business rivals, who always coincidentally found themselves branded as enemies of the state. Corruption aside, Crassus was also an avid real estate mogul, running silver mines and construction projects staffed by his personal army of thousands of slave laborers. Most interesting, however, was Crassus's favorite flavor of financial venture, buying the charred remains of burnt houses to renovate at dirt-cheap prices. He used this strategy to such great success that he managed to found Rome's first fire brigade, which allowed him to buy homes that were currently burning instead of just the ones that had already burnt down. Anytime he got word of a fire, he would rush to the scene with his army of 500 hunky firemen, waving his ancient Roman checkbook around, immediately offering to buy the land. If the owner refused, Crassus would simply turn around with his perfectly capable fire brigade and trudge back home, leaving the land to just burn. In fact, Crassus was so well known for his greed that in one of my favorite anecdotes, it saved his life. You see, in ancient Rome, there was a group of 6 women called the Vestal Virgins, who served the goddess Vesta in her temple, tending to Vesta's sacred fire, an eternal flame that could never be allowed to dim, for to do so meant doom for Rome. Because they were directly subservient to the gods and tended to the flame of Rome's future, they were a big deal and had to keep a strict oath of chastity or face death. Also, fun fact, the temple where they housed the fire burnt down a solid 3 or 4 times, but hey, the flame of Rome was still burning, so who cares? The thing was, because of their social status, the Vestal Virgins were some of the only women allowed to own property in the whole of Rome, and this is where Crassus comes in. Crassus had been eyeing a particularly luxurious villa in the Forum, and upon inquiring as to its owner, he was disheartened to find it belonged to a Vestal Virgin named Licinia, a woman he couldn't just write off as a traitor. So instead, he decided to butter her up. Crassus had the bright idea to start bumping into Licinia in public, meeting her at parties and other such events, bringing her gifts. Now, when you start buying gifts and repeatedly bumping into one of the most important, influential, and sworn to be a virgin or we throw you in a hole till you starve women in Rome, people start to take notice. Crassus was promptly arrested and accused of attempting to corrupt Licinia, which was a super death sentence if he was found guilty. It was at this point that he finally came clean and admitted that he was only being nice to another human being so he could get a good deal on her house. Had anyone else used this excuse, they'd have died, but Crassus was just so well known for being sleazy that the judges took him at his word and let him go, whereupon he was immediately chewed out by Licinia with something along the lines of, "You fucking moron, you almost got us both killed. If you wanted to buy my house, you should have just asked." He then bought her house for its full price. Despite his great financial success, Crassus consistently found himself placing dead last in the First Triumvirate's frequent dick measuring contests. Things got so bad that he bought an entire army and stormed down to put an end to Spartacus' slave rebellion in a desperate bid for social clout. After killing 500 of his own men, suppressing the rebellion, and eventually making his way back to Rome, Crassus was greeted with cheers for Pompey the Great, who had mistakenly been credited for stopping Spartacus. And that was the last straw. Crassus decided he was sick of losing, and when he heard of the neighboring Parthians and their vast wealth, he hoped that if he could conquer their land for himself, he could show up to next week's dick measuring competition sufficiently endowed. He decided to take a break from Scrooge McDucking with his swimming pool of silver at his home in Syria, and charged headfirst into Parthia, bridging the Euphrates and leading a pretty successful initial conquest. Until winter rolled around, and he decided that conquest was hard and he needed a break. Crassus packed up his things and he went on a vacation back to his governorship in Syria. Naturally, this confused the Parthians. Why had Crassus given them the time to regroup? They just chalked it up to his age, as at this point, Crassus was now 60. 60 years old and trying to conquer an entire empire. While on vacation, Crassus' son, they shared the same name, so just like imagine Crassus but slightly smaller, came along to prove himself in combat with his father. But before returning to the front, both stopped by their local temple to Venus. After a short prayer, they got up to leave, only for Crassus' son to trip in front of his father, sending the elder Crassus tumbling wildly over his son, giving them both a healthy serving of ancient Roman pavement and a grim foreshadowing for the times to come. Upon returning to the Parthian front, Crassus' men were tired and lacked any cavalry, which made it all the easier for the 6,000 highly trained mounted Parthian archers lying in wait to surround and pick off the Roman soldiers. The men begged to retreat, but Crassus insisted that the Parthians would soon run out of arrows. They did not. Eventually, according to legend, Crassus' men were defeated and he was captured alive. And only at this point, surrounded by 6,000 very angry Parthians, all by himself, did Crassus realize maybe how much of a dick he was. He was executed as the opposing general stepped forward and poured molten gold down his throat. Like I said at the beginning, metal as hell. Now, historians say it's far more likely Crassus and his son were killed in a botched parlay after their thorough Parthian ass-whooping, but many have taken to the molten gold story because, man, wouldn't Crassus just totally deserve it? Either way, after the fact, Crassus' head was removed and sent back to King Orodes II, who then donated it to a theater troupe to use as a prop for a Greek tragedy he was attending. To add further insult to injury, before publicly announcing Crassus' death, the Parthian king found a Roman prisoner who bore a remarkable resemblance to our dead rich boy, and decided to style on Crassus one last time. The prisoner was dressed as a woman and paraded through the city to be viciously mocked before being promptly executed. I'm not really sure what the moral of the story is, but I can only imagine that it's something along the lines of, being rich can only get you out of so much trouble before eventually the Parthians come knocking.